One show the thoda swagat hai. Today's one show आज दा जिहड़ा show ਅਸੀਂ ਇੱਕ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਾਡਾ topic ਹੋਣਾ ਉਹ ਹੈ ਹੋਣਾ ਦੁੱਖ ਜਾਂ ਆਪਾਂ English ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ we can call it suffering. What is the concept of suffering, concept of dukh in Gurmat, in Gurbani, but also how do we respond to that? How do we overcome suffering? So how do we conceptualize it and how do we overcome that? What is the relationship between suffering, dukh, and naam? They're the kind of key concepts, Manjit, that we're looking to. So, our program, we're going to try and do it in Punjabi. Punjabi de vich bhi ta English de vich bhi koshish karni hai, par assi jinne bhi ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਤਕਰੀਬਨ ਸਾਰੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਇੰਗਲੈਂਡ ਦੇ ਜੰਪਲ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਤੇ ਸੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮਾਫੀ ਕਰਨੀ apologize if we focus more on the English side. But I'll try and summarize as well Punjabi. So I think we should introduce our guests and get on with the show, yeah?
We should do, definitely.
Yeah. Delighted once again to welcome Mere Doveer. They've been on before. My immediate right, Bhai Satpal Singh ji. You'll know Bhai Satpal Singh ji. He's one of what we might call the modern day kind of Sikhi Pracharaks. He works to seva with an organisation called Nanak Naam. And you can see him on the YouTube videos, and they've got a website as well. And he's doing some amazing kind of work, particularly not only in the Punjabi Sikh community, but in the wider community. So welcome to the show, Satpal ji. Waheguru ji ka khalsa. And next to Satpal, we've got Jasvinder. I think it's the second time you've joined us. But Jasvinder, as well as being a professional, he's also a poet and armchair philosopher maybe as well. Yeah. So delighted to have you as well. Waheguru ji ka khalsa, Waheguru ji ki fateh. Let's just kick off, guys, with the basics, really, the kind of get some of our concepts right. So when we talk about suffering, what is suffering? What is dukh according to Gurbani? Satpal ji.
I think this is a really interesting subject, and I'm really glad that we're tackling that, because the more people that I speak to, it becomes really evident that this is actually something that, as a community, we're not talking about. When we look at Gurbani, from my understanding, I think Gurbani talks about suffering in three different ways. Like there's a hierarchical structure of three causes of suffering. At the very superficial layer, we could say that your desires cause suffering. The next level down, we can talk about your perception of control causes your suffering. You think that you have control in life, and when things don't happen, then you start worrying, and that's where suffering comes. And at the very deep-rooted layer is this body-mind identity, that we identify with our body and mind. And if we can go into a little bit of that, I think those are the layers that Guru Granth Sahib Ji is talking about.
But just if we can I think that's a really useful start, but maybe just when you could come in here as well. We still haven't really defined what suffering is. I mean, if we take a kind of common sense view of suffering, suffering is, going without food. Suffering is being beaten by somebody. Suffering is being tormented, maybe racially abused. Most people would see suffering as, living in poverty, and those kind of very practical, everyday kind of experiences.
So it's great that you bring that up in that way, because actually, I would actually say that those are not actually suffering themselves. They are the causes of suffering, or they are a potential cause of suffering. So spiritual traditions, and I'm going to probably have a wider sort of sense of things, and perhaps Satpal, who's much more of a Gurbani scholar than I am. But all the Eastern traditions carve out suffering as a kind of psychological resistance that we have to physical events in the world. So they separate it out from the causes of suffering, and they say actually suffering, and what we're trying to tackle here, and what can be tackled with these traditions, is your psychological and emotional response. So it's the resistance you feel to these kind of events. Now obviously, there is a very close correlation with extreme pain and torture and things like that with the psychological response you're going to have. But the theory actually stands its grounds when you think of things like there are types of pain that you would feel, such as childbirth, or if you're going to the gym and things like that, which your mindset is completely different and interprets that kind of physical stimuli in a completely different way. So I think for our discussion sort of going forward as well, it would be useful to start looking at suffering as the emotional and psychological response that we have, and sort of separate it from the causes of suffering.
Okay, I mean, I think that obviously we ultimately go to the level of the Atma. But I still want to stay at this level because we don't want to be accused of somehow playing down people's kind of everyday struggles. And certainly, there's a huge emphasis on seva, on serving and feeding. So surely the Gurus recognise these kind of needs as well that people have. So whilst we might drill down suffering at the kind of level of the soul and theological kind of questions, at the everyday levels, that doesn't mean that Sikhs shouldn't be concerned with everyday suffering or pain and struggles that people have.
Yeah, I think we can, following on from what Jasvinder Singh said, is that we can almost split it up into two different sources of suffering, two different causes of suffering. One is the external cause, and one is just mental suffering, because there are people who are genuinely struggling with physical difficulties, like there's no food or a lack of money or things like that, disabled or anything like that. But then there are the other people who are materially very well off, but emotionally suffering. So we can talk about suffering essentially in two different ways, from the mind and suffering from the external factors.
If one has so much faith in Guruji, why should they suffer?
I think there's two different things here. One is a faith in, well, it depends on what your relationship with the Guru is, but the causes of suffering affect everyone. It's whether you have that emotional response that Jasvinder Singh was saying, is whether we actually, whether your faith and your spiritual belief actually allows you to create some sort of coping mechanism for the external response.
Well, let's explore
so we don't necessarily have to suffer if we have this kind of tradition that allows us to be resilient to these things.
But I think there's still an interesting question there. If you look at the kind of the kind of people that go to like worship and temples, and not just in our tradition but in other tradition, they tend to be people who are suffering. I mean, who have ailments, who are wanting cures. Whereas the kind of materially comfortable people, wealthy people, they have a different relationship. So, is it about the suffering for people who haven't got material wealth, or it just doesn't seem right that people who have got material wealth would be suffering? In the everyday kind of way in which we might think about suffering.
I think actually that just speaks even more to the fact that suffering, when we talk about suffering, we need to actually divorce it from the causes of suffering, because it's very easy to then conflate the issues and say, well, actually I can see a cause of suffering and therefore there must be suffering, and just completely denounce anyone who appears to have material wealth and seems to be pretty well off and say, well, actually I'm not going to allow you to even claim that you can suffer because you've got everything you physically need. Suffering is a psychological response, and sometimes it can be a psychological malfunction. You can have everything you need and one day you can just wake up and feel anxious and absolutely rubbish with yourself. And I think what the wisdom traditions of the East do is give you the tools to deal with that, is to say, look, this is your suffering and your mental state is actually, you can divorce it from your physical surroundings. Yes, of course, there are going to be things that we need shelter and food, and those are going to be necessities. But there are mechanisms in place and there are tools we can give you, and Sikhi does that fantastically, to say, actually, we can divorce you from those enough that you can have a resilience that's almost superhuman in a sense. And the Gurus have demonstrated this time and time again with the kind of things that we would normally associate would cause extreme suffering. They've been unbelievable.
So it seems like this is a completely different system of approaching this question than the Western psychological tradition. I mean, some people will know of the work of Abraham Maslow and this idea that we have a hierarchy of need, where Maslow says that those higher level kind of where you engage intellectually are kind of higher level needs, but you've got to satisfy those basic kind of fulfill the physical needs. And I can't remember the shad, but I think Kabirji talks about this, that if you don't kind of meditate while your body is fit, then so we can't completely separate the kind of physical capacity, if you like, for the physical pain from the kind of inner kind of torment that we might have in our souls. That's the whole essence of Sikhi, isn't it? That the connection between the miri and the piri, between the physical and the So we can't just dismiss the physical, can we?
No, I think what we're doing is we're giving a much more broader definition of the word suffering than limiting it to the physical.
Because we now with sort of detaching it from the physical, we can include other causes. We can include, like I've said, dysfunction or illness or ailments which may not be obviously material or have a physical external cause, but are still causing extreme suffering. If you only talk about suffering in the context of obvious physical causes, you ignore a massive part of the population.
And I think this is what we're seeing even now in what we would say is civilized Western culture. Even now, mental health has got a massive stigma because a lot of people just don't identify with that as suffering.
The numbers have gone up.
Yeah, because what we're doing is still we're having a very almost medieval understanding of suffering. So we're saying, well, everything is there for you physically. You're not suffering, so that means there should be. So it kind of reduces the sympathy that we have for people just because we say that they're mentally suffering. Whereas if we define suffering as an internal process, as an internal suffering, regardless of the external, then it levels the playing field. Then anyone is suffering for whatever reason, because in the same light, we can say that there are, time and time again, you get aid workers that go to war-stricken countries and poverty-stricken countries, and they say, we look at all these people who have nothing on the outside, and we can't understand why they're smiling, because they seem to be above the physicals, because the Western world has just pushed the physicals so much that their understanding of suffering just falls apart when they see young, poor children just laughing and happy.
Well, let me be a bit more provocative now and suggest that let me put it another way. If my child is suffering from, say, leukemia, then should I take that child to a spiritualist, or should I take that child to the hospital?
I don't think it's an either-or kind of question, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think there is.
But if you're saying that we've got to separate the symptoms from the kind of deeper. So is it about enabling that family, that person to live with that pain, as it were, by seeing a deeper meaning in life, which you could argue is... I mean, if I'm thinking about, say, Ravidasji, and if you read a lot of the kind of Ravidasji's Bani, it's all about, you've given me all the kind of physical suffering that you want, and I've lived in the kind of dirt as a chamad and all these things. But inside myself, I'm liberated, I'm free, I'm happy. Begum Para, he says, I've achieved a utopia, although, you might think that I'm nothing. So is it that quest to, as it were, live with the physical sufferings of, that divana lagi, or is it actually both? There's a connection between the two,
I would say that there's
you can't meditate if your leg's killing you.
I would say if there's a cause of pain...
It depends how good you are meditating, to be honest with you.
But we're not into that. I mean, that's the whole thing.
I would say that there's two things here. One is that if you have pain and you have the ability to take that pain away, why wouldn't you? I think it's completely human nature.
And anesthesia, medicine, we should have that.
Absolutely.
Yeah?
I'm not suggesting that somebody who's
and if you're hungry, we should alleviate people's hunger.
Completely.
And just to come in here, I think because we're getting quite into detail about where we should place suffering and what should be in and what should be out. I think it's useful to just sort of talk about, well, why is this necessary to sort of separate it out? Because to be honest with you, Gurbani is very clear that the world and the conditions we're in, we are not going to be able to manipulate them to our liking all the time. Yes, we can go to the doctor if our leg is hurting us, or in certain circumstances, but circumstances will inevitably arise in our lives when we cannot deal with them by sorting the physical world out. And Gurbani is quite clear about that the world is going to do what the world is going to do. Hukum, basically. What Gurbani is telling us is your resistance to what the world is doing can be dealt with. The way you're framing your environment can be dealt with, and actually can be dealt with in a really drastic way. So I mean, if you take the example of Guru Arjan Dev Ji, sitting on the Tatti Tavi, he was enduring pain, and I'm being very careful with my words here. He was enduring extreme pain, but in his mind there was no suffering, because he had completely transcended. He had no resistance to what was happening. He was actually, obviously we all know the Gurbani. He was talking about it favourably, that this is mita to me. So, and you can look at Guru Gobind Singh and when he loses his sons, and they had transcended a state where actually the physical world didn't cause that kind of emotional resistance and didn't cause that suffering. Now, I'm not saying we can all get there tomorrow, but actually it's surprisingly quick how you can start to observe your experience through practices like meditation and start to see where the suffering that you're having to endure is caused by your framing of a situation rather than what's going on.
So is this to do with your basta?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's take an easy example. If someone pushes in front of you in a queue, emotions of anger arise straight away, and that anger can torture you if you continue to perpetuate the thoughts which actually support it. If you, however, click a hold of it and think, actually, this is just a physical reaction I'm having, I can view this quite dispassionately, what you find is that actually if the thoughts are not feeding that anger, the physical sensations subside. So it's about divorcing what's actually happening in the real world and your reaction to it. And normally our reactions make things a lot worse. So
what about coming in from a different angle? Because we believe in kind of nature. We believe that the human body is like an organism, just like anything else is. But that there is a deeper purpose. But that the organism itself needs to be looked after. That the organism shouldn't be allowed to. Well, suffer is kind of quite emotional word. It almost implies some subjectivity, but that it shouldn't allowed to be wither away. That's just like deteriorate. Yeah, and in that sense, you could say that it's not as if we're ignoring the physical life, but we're seeing life beyond the kind of just nourishing the physical. That's the key thing, isn't it?
I think absolutely, yeah. There is no need to limit suffering to just the physical, and I think it's really important that we, in fact, address the mental and psychological issues that are causing suffering, because I would say the majority of people who are watching and the majority of people who are at home and are living quite a comfortable life, we can't just say that physically they're fine, so emotionally they're fine. So it's really important that we actually start saying, well, what is suffering?
Well, I mean, let's come to that. I mean, Manjit, everyday Bani Dukhdaru Sukhruk Paya. And Guru here seems to even take it one stage further. Not only is he helping us to avoid suffering, maybe, but he's actually saying suffering is the actual medicine. What's going on here?
So, I mean, so one thing that I think is important to say is if you take any line from the Gurbani and sort of take it out of context and look at it literally, you can sometimes come up with erroneous conclusions. Now, in my personal opinion, Guruji is being...
And he said that Sukh is the cause. In fact, he said
absolutely,
Sukh is the cause of...
Yeah. So he's being, Guruji is being provocative as he always is, to almost grab us and get our attention and say that, don't get too comfortable with your lives. Actually, you are going to suffer. It's almost an inevitability until you sort of can transcend that. But that suffering can be viewed in the context of there is some attachment there is some desire there that you need to deal with. This is a signal your body is giving you that actually you are not running in the optimum fashion and something needs to be dealt with there. So you can go through life pretty blasé if you like and live a pretty mediocre life, but actually these kicks show us that there is something a lot better that we can aspire to, and they're the kick in the right direction. So that's the way I view that line.
I think the way Guruji is using this line is what he's done time and time again with Gurbani is he's taken a very pivotal concept which society looks at and he's turned it upside down. Guruji has done the same thing with death. He's done the same thing with ego. He's done the same thing with Kaljug. He takes all of these as an opportunity to say, actually, this is great, and now let me tell you why. So what I think Guruji is doing here is Guruji is actually saying, let's just look at Dukh. And it's not that he's saying that all of you start running after Dukh. What he's saying is that there is a solution within this. But the solution is only from Dukh, not when we all go and look for Dukh, but when we understand Dukh. When we understand Dukh, we can make Dukh into a medicine. And because we don't understand Dukh, what we do is we're all running away from Dukh and we're all running towards Sukh. And what Guruji does time and time again, he actually says, don't run towards happiness, because my explanation of happiness will make it very clear that you haven't thought it through, and happiness leads to sadness. So let's just look at what sadness is, let's look at what suffering is, then it can become a medicine in your life.
That's part of this kind of interesting play with these concepts. But I mean, so far we've tried to equate suffering with the kind of physical ailments and needs and kind of social life, if you like. But in Gurbani, there's another shabd, it's a Hammeti Rog hai, Daru pi is my. It's actually saying that the true suffering is is really about, you were saying psychological. I think Guruji says even further, it's almost part of our soul.
So this goes back to goes back to the three levels of dukh that I think Guruji talks about. At the very superficial layer, Guruji talks about anything that you desire is a dukh. And I think that's a very fundamental way to start looking at the world, because we actually think that ambition and success and all these things are very positive things, and that's how society puts a positive spin on it. But what Guruji is saying is actually anything that you desire, actually it means that right now you feel unsettled. At any point that you want something in life, what you're saying is, I'm unfulfilled right now, I will be more fulfilled when I get that. That's a type of dukh. And then desire comes from this sense that when you think, I want something, then the second cause of dukh is...
ego.
Well, that's
the second cause of dukh is then to say, I have the ability to do something.
Okay.
Now, I have the ability to do something when that doesn't go right, because you think, well, I can physically go and buy whatever I want, but for whatever reason it doesn't happen. And the third reason, which is goes back to the point that you made, which is that I identify with my body and my mind. I think I am my body and my mind. And Guru, at every single one of these levels, he turns the explanation upside down and he says, desire is a problem. Your idea that you can control the world and your life is a problem and the cause of your suffering. And the very thing that you identify with, which you think you are your body and your mind, he says that's a cause of your suffering.
But Jasvinder, I mean, again, I'm going to try to bring it back to the kind of, as it were, the kind of physical world in which we live our lives, in workplaces. You know, we talk about in management and in organisational theories about how you motivate staff, how you motivate them to perform better, to be happier. And, you know, they often say it's got to be a balance of financial rewards, but also them actually feeling part of an organisation, So, in some senses, this is going beyond that. It's saying that the way to motivate people is almost to break their dependency on those kind of material desires and things like that.
Well, I mean, not necessarily. I mean, I think when we look at a workplace context, we are not dealing with people who are in an enlightened state of being, who are, understand their psyches and therefore are always going to be drawn to the wholesome, rewards.
But there are many organisational kind of management consultants now bringing in meditation or mindfulness and saying that you have to almost attack this problem from a different angle.
Well, we'll probably come on to this. I mean, Satpal and I have discussed this at length ourselves, but there is a slight issue with the way mindfulness is being packaged up and sold as this kind of this newfangled executive tool, to something to have in your toolkit
to make more money.
It's
a slight paradox there.
You've got organisations dealing with stress and people having time off for various sort of ailments. So this is almost the additional thing, the toolkit to have, and say, right, a bit of mindfulness. If you add that into your exercise and you're eating 5 fruits a day, it will give you something useful to
But isn't that precisely what the Sikh kind of institutional framework has become? You come to the Gurdwara, you give money, you book an Akhand Path, and you spend your money. But somehow, and again, he will do an ardas for you, and you'll get a new car, you'll get a job, your children will get educated. We're also into that kind of exchange. एक सौदा करते हैं, सच्चा सौदा नहीं हैगा, महाराज मान किया ये झूठा सौदा है. But we're also trapped, and it's a bit like the kind of management. We're bringing the Buddhist mindfulness trainer, and we'll have more profits, and everybody will be richer. There's a paradox here, isn't there?
I would imagine that a lot of people can see through that and actually be able to see that there isn't, some sort of fountain of joy at the end of an Akhand Path. There isn't this kind of everlasting peace and bliss just because Gyaniji done an ardas for us. So I'm not taking anything away from those things, but I think most people understand that actually maybe...
Should we desire anything worldly at all then? Should we be desiring children, a son, cars? Because that's often the motive for people to follow religion.
But I think Satpal's already, I think, eloquently answered this. It's effectively, all Eastern religions have diagnosed suffering as being caused by desires. At the root of desires are attachments. At the root of attachment is ego.
And religion, in a sense, is trapped within this kind of cycle. Institutionalized religion.
Well, institutionalized religion, yes.
Gurdwaras
But institutionalized religion isn't necessarily the same thing as religious philosophy. So we need to have a conversation about, are we talking about the social ills and how we've interpreted religion and what is playing out, or actually you know, can we go back to basics and say, well, what does Sikhi offer us as viable tools?
We're going to go to the break in a few minutes. I just wanted to थोड़ी आप पंजाबी दे विच भी समराइज कर दिया ਆਪਾਂ ਅੱਜ ਦੇ ਸ਼ੋਅ ਦੇ ਉੱਪਰ ਦੁੱਖ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਆਂ ਵੀ ਦੁੱਖ ਕੀ ਹੈ ਦੁੱਖ ਦਾਰੂ ਸੁਖ ਰੋਗ ਪਿਆ ਜਾਂ ਸੁਖ ਤਾਮ ਨਾ ਹੋਈ ਇਹ ਆਪਾਂ ਭੂਮਿਕਾ ਇਹ ਤੋਂ ਬਣਾਈ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਇਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਅਸੀਂ ਹੁਣ ਇੱਥੇ ਤੱਕ ਪਹੁੰਚੇ ਆਂ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਤਾਂ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਰੀਰਕ ਦੁੱਖ ਆ ਫਿਜ਼ੀਕਲ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਕਹਿ ਸਕਦੇ ਆਂ ਇੱਕ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਮਨ ਦਾ ਵੀ ਦੁੱਖ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਪਰ ਇੱਕ ਦੁੱਖ ਹੈਗਾ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਆਤਮਾ ਦਾ ਦੁੱਖ ਯਾਨੀ ਕਿ ਦ ਸਪਿਰਿਚੁਅਲ ਲੈਵਲ ਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਦੁੱਖ ਆਇਆ ਜਿਹਨੂੰ ਆਪਾਂ ਹਉਮੈ ਵੀ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਮੰਨ ਰਹੇ ਹਉਮੈ ਮੋਹ ਦੁੱਖ ਭਾਰੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹਉਮੈ ਔਰ ਮੋਹ ਜਾਂ ਅਟੈਚਮੈਂਟ ਇਹ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਭਾਰਾ ਦੁੱਖ ਆ ਇਟ ਵੇਜ਼ ਯੂ ਡਾਊਨ ਹੋਰ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਬਾਣੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਹਉਮੈ ਰੋਗ ਵੱਡਾ ਸੰਸਾਰ Ego is the biggest disease in this sansar. ਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਹੋਰ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਆਉਂਦਾ ਹਉਮੈ ਰੋਗ ਕਠਨ ਤਨ ਪੀਰਾ ਕਠਨ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਬਹੁਤ arduous really difficult it's the most difficult pain to alleviate and that's interesting in itself katan
I think what's very difficult for most people is how do they understand their own haume because haume unfortunately gets translated as ego and ego unfortunately gets translated as pride and pride is not the issue here which is why I use a very different term which is your body mind identity haume is the fact that I think I am this body and mind and that was what Guru is saying is the disease
that's really interesting because if we look at Descartes' basic proposition ergo sum cogito, that's precisely what you said. I think, so therefore I am. And you all seem to say that that's the root of the problem.
So Descartes didn't go far enough, effectively. Great guy, but to be honest with you, his philosophy doesn't compare with what Eastern philosophers had been doing for thousands of years. So he conflates thoughts with the sense of I am. And what Eastern philosophers have been saying for thousands of years is actually if you introspect closely, you can see various layers of what you think you are. So your thoughts sit on top, a sense of I sits below that, a sense of attachment to the body sits below that, and all of these can be worked through independently and can actually sort of come apart. So Descartes, I mean, it's
Descartes is affirming the I, and the Guruji is saying you have to escape the I. Absolutely. That's the whole point, isn't it?
It's not like just Descartes doesn't know what to do with it. He doesn't. You know, he's identified that there is something ethereal about our experience. There's something suspicious and wonderful about consciousness, and he equates it to thoughts. What he didn't have the tools, unfortunately, were the introspective tools to actually separate out. Well, actually, even these thoughts are just something that I'm perceiving, like my hands and my body. They're just something external to me. So what am I? What am I actually?
If we're saying that once you start identifying with yourself, you were saying earlier on about when we, you know, meh, which is I. That's the root cause of the ego. The argument then would be that if we get rid of the ego, then we have no identity. That seems equally problematic. That could be a mental kind of crisis as well.
I think that's the solution. Gurbani talks about man mare. Gurbani talks about jivat mare, being something that kills the mind and being dead while alive. And Gurbani actually states that these are the Brahmgyanis, these are the ones who have no self-identity. Because what they've done is, it's not that they have no self-identity, they've understood that their real identity is not limited to the body and the mind. It's the bit beyond that. And that's the bit that we don't know from a daily experience.
Even the idea of killing your ego is a confusion, because you're giving your ego some reality that it doesn't deserve. You're saying actually it exists and then it will go away. What
Gurbani does talk about that, manu marna, man kaswati la, ਇਹ ਵੀ ਕਿਹਾ ਵੀ ਕੱਟ ਕੇ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਕਿਤੇ ਜਗ੍ਹਾ ਤੇ ਲਾਵੋ ਟਿਕਾਵੋ ਇਹਨੂੰ.
Gurbani makes very distinct use of very different words, so man and mat and home in very particular ways, and to conflate them is dangerous because then you start thinking, well, actually there is an ego and I need to get rid of it. Actually, what Gurbani really says is there's no ego at all. You've got a sense of self, and it's that sense that is an illusion, and that's a mistaken illusion. And actually, you can see through that illusion to see that there was no one there in the first place. And once you see that there's no one there in the first place, there's no attachments that can stick to no one. There's no desires that can stick to these non-existent attachments, and suddenly suffering dissipates. Again, this is the thesis. This is what's being presented to us as the solution. So yeah, we're getting to very esoteric areas now about ego and the nuances.
We're going to go for a break, but we started off with Guru Arjan Dev Ji gave the example that Guruji sits on the Tati Tavi. But did he feel pain? Did he physically feel pain? That's the question. Or is it the fact that his spirituality, his own kind of heightened level of spirituality, meant that pain couldn't afflict him?
To me, I think firstly there's absolutely no way that we can answer what
I was just going to say that.
But I think what's really interesting is that Guru Arjan Dev Ji had to do that act in order to set the benchmark for suffering. Guruji set the benchmark and said, even in that example, I will show you that you can be free. So I'm not interested in whether Guruji felt pain or not, because I don't have the ability to answer that. But I think what's really interesting is how do we then understand our own suffering when we...
Well, the reason why I'm saying it is because if somebody becomes spiritually aware, how can they feel the kind of everyday suffering that other people might have, the physical suffering, if they themselves have become detached from that? So, and clearly the Guru was connected. I mean, the Gurus, that's why they did the langar, and that's why they were, they were feeling people suffering.
But we have a lot of anecdotal evidence for this from accounts of people.
Krishna Sahib Ji was running hospitals and things like that,
So we have anecdotal evidence to demonstrate that actually this kind of process, this project that people have engaged in, has actually increased their compassion, not decreased it. So, and we've got that from anecdotal evidence, but we've also got neurological evidence now supporting that people who meditate, their sense of self, the areas of their brain that are associated with the sense of self, are deactivated, and yet their compassion centres fire up. So
that's
I don't think it's something we have to worry about.
Yeah, so that's right. I mean, we're going to go for a break now, but I'm just going to end with one more shabad, because I think it kind of picks up another angle. It's about, in fact, again, this home which ayah, home which I come in ego, I go with ego. Home which jammya, home which mua. Home which ditta, home which laya, home which khatya, home which gaya, home which satyar kuryar, home which papa pun vichar, home which nark surg avatar, home which hasya, home which rove, home which pariya, home which tove. So this Shabad says that home is everywhere. We're going to explore a bit more of that, and also Naam after the break. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome back to the One Show. Today we're talking about suffering of dukh, and also how can we overcome dukh. And in the second half of the show, we're going to be focusing very much on that. So, if sukh actually puts us into a deep sleep of illusion of maya, then Gurbani says that dukh can awaken us as well. It makes us patient and humble and takes us closer to the truth. Bani likhya, har ka naam अमृत है दारू एह लहेओ तुद तदे जा विसरे जावे नाम विसार सहे जम दुख. So in Gurbani it talks about Naam being dukh panjan tera naam ji Maharaj Bani kende. To destroy true suffering is Naam, and we often think about Naam and meditation, so we're going to be exploring these things. I don't know whether you want to pick up Naam or meditation first, but let's wherever you want to start.
So I would
that's
say,
the solution to suffering.
Yeah, and I think it's important to distinguish the two. Let's firstly talk about meditation, because that's a concept that people all over the world are familiar with, and what we think meditation is, as opposed to what the general society and world think meditation is. And I think real meditation in the Sikh tradition isn't this idea of just sitting in one place and looking like a Buddha and doing a Buddha pose. That is a meditation, but I think Gurbani talks about a different way of looking at meditation, which is this idea of being aware, being present, having an idea, no matter wherever you are, of a sense of reality.
Jagrup,
it's like Gurbani says, so I think people are talking about meditation in the Western sense very much from the Buddhist tradition, which is this kind of sitting down and just being completely zen and silent.
So it's not about going inside yourself then?
It's always about going inside yourself. It's not about the mechanism of sitting in one place. It's about being constantly aware. So the way I look at meditation, for me, it is the practice of what the Gurus have taught. So if one is the gyan of the Gurus, the wisdom of the Gurus, meditation is the lived experience of the Gurus. It's literally when you walk around outside on the street, where is your mind? That's how I would describe meditation. Is your mind lost?
Is it wandering?
Is it wandering, or is there a sense of being constantly aware of what the Gurus have taught us? And the way the Guru says to do that is, Naam is a very effective way to keep that sense of awareness.
But what about your senses? Because our senses, our sense of sight and touch and hearing, smell. These are things that connect us to the kind of material world. Yeah, if you switched off the senses, you would in effect become disconnected from the material world.
The mantra da dor there in
Yeah,
it's always wondering.
but the question for me is: are we trying to switch them off?
No,
Because I think,
we are.
or are we trying to see through them? I mean, what's the role of? Because we often talk about a communicator, Naam Japo. But why can't I open my eyes up and still do meditation?
Well, this goes back to the quote that we said,
Yeah.
put the bat at the sword with the jargon.
Yeah.
So there is no restriction that you have to close your eyes, and certainly not in Guru Granth Sahib Ji is there anywhere that explicitly recommends that it's better to sit down and close your eyes and do it. It talks about Naam
But isn't it easier?
Connection and sorti.
Yeah, sorti learning.
I think that's
Isn't it easier to go in a kudiya in a temple?
I think
Is it not easier?
it's a very
Sit in
good
the jungle
starting
somewhere?
point. I think it's a very good starting point. If you have a person just walking around on the street and you just say Naam Japo, they can do it, but their mind will constantly wander. So I think it's a very good starting point to sit down and actually learn how to meditate.
Yeah.
But then it's about how do you move past that? How do you do that in your everyday experience? Because Guruji didn't recommend that everybody just lived in a forest for 20 years. They said actually while you're earning your daily bread, while you're rearing your children, while you're doing everything, you should be able to...
Jasvinder, is there a
keep that
special
awareness.
place or a special time, a special day to meditate? Or
No, I think Gurbani is quite clear about that. That effectively there is no special place or time, and this is something that actually, at its pinnacle, we should be trying to do as much as we can. Obviously, there is reference to Amrit Vela being a very good time, and I think there's a number of we won't get into that, but there's a number of reasons why that could be a very good time from practical purposes, but also neurological evidence now that we've got about the state of the mind in the morning. But I think in terms of just touching upon the discussion about meditation, I think you've got to walk before you can run. So I think you've got to evaluate for yourself whether actually sitting down in a quiet room in the dark is actually a good starting point for you before you start thinking, well, actually I should be able to meditate anywhere, which you should, but sometimes you've got to, the practicalities of meditation have to come into play. Maybe it's worth turning the washing machine off before you meditate, and then when you start to build some proficiency in it, it doesn't matter if the washing machine's going on or someone's shouting next door, because effectively you're now able to block that out.
So you can do that, right? But you're a manya, like he's always wondering, how can you control it?
yeah,
So
thoughts
I always
are all
find
over
this
the
a
place.
fascinating question because it's almost like, and I think the best way to answer that is the parallel, because I hear this all the time, manni takada, I want to do it, but manni takada. It's like someone saying, I want to get healthier, physically healthier, and I want to start running, but every time I run I get tired. That's the point.
Yeah.
That's the barrier that you're coming up against, that you're trying to work towards and move out. So when you first start meditating and you find that you can't concentrate, Guruji has given us the exact tool to work on our levels of concentration. And what you find is with repeated attempts, your man does start to slowly take. And so
So connect with the Guru. Yeah?
Well, just use the tools that the Guru has given us, and at the very basic level, Guruji recommends Naam Japana, and in a very traditional sense.
So Satpal, I mean, we need tools, yeah? And meditation are tools. And the key thing that we're trying to do is trying to Naam Japana.
Yeah.
Now, is that a physical? Because when I think about Japana, I think of kind of physical repetition, maybe chanting. Is that what we're talking about, or is Naam something much more sublime?
I think Guruji has used a very specific word here, and if you think about Guru Granth Sahib Ji, generally the word Naam is used a lot more than the word mantra. So it makes it very clear that Naam is something far deeper than just the repetition of a word. Naam, Japana is the repetition of a word, but Jap, another meaning of the word Jap means to know, rather than just to recite. So Naam Japana takes a far deeper meaning. One thing I always say to people is, whenever we're going to talk about Naam, let's talk about the first time the word appears, because that sets the context for what Naam is. What's the first time that the word Naam appears is in the Mool Mantra, and it says Satnam. Now the definition of Satnam, whether you take it to be truth or existence, what he's saying there is truth or existence of the universe is Naam. So Naam Japana is no longer just restricted to reciting a word. Guruji is saying consciousness and being aware of existence and the reality of existence.
Well, if she came, off the streets and I'm dukhi, I'm in suffering, I'm anguish, and I come to you and I say, look, help me, I need some Naam. What would you practically, what kind of things could I do? What kind of practical, give me some practical tips.
Absolutely.
You know.
I think for the example that you've given, where somebody's just coming and needs immediate help right now, I would actually recommend you sit down and you do some breathing exercises just to calm your mind down, just because when you're suffering, a lot of the time your mind is just running very fast. And actually there's some very simple tools that we can show. When your mind gets angry, when you get really panicked, your breathing speeds up.
Yeah.
So the inverse is also true. That actually if you're feeling very anxious, let's just sit you down for a few minutes and slow your breathing down.
So relaxation techniques.
Relaxation, that's an absolute basic of meditation in any tradition. Let's just sit down and do that first. And then I would always say...
Can't you give me a mantra or something? Can't you give me something to repeat?
Well, what I find really interesting is when people have come up to me and said that, you know, we've been going to the Gurdwara for 20 years, we've been doing Simran and we're doing Kirtan and all these things, but our mind doesn't settle down. The example I always give, and the reason I say that sitting down and actually just first calming your mind down, is like if you were a professional musician, you would never go on stage and just start playing. The first thing you do is you tune your instrument. So in the same way, I wouldn't just give you an arm and says, here you go, here's the word Waheguru, just do that. Actually, first tune your instrument. Just switch that off for a moment. Switch your mind off just for a moment, and then the sound will have a lot more impact on you. The music will actually sound a lot better, and the Naam will work a lot better, rather than just giving someone who's sort of on a treadmill and just running and
you know, you mentioned about
at a fast pace.
The breathing. What sort of how is it a deep breath, or is it what do you mean by breathing? In what?
So when Gurbani talks about sa simra with every breath, the first thing, again this is only my understanding and my interpretation, the first thing is any breath technique actually just tells you to just become aware of your breath. We're breathing all the time, but we're not aware of it. We have to understand that actually all of these are tools. Naam is a tool, breath is a tool, but it's not the end destination. What it's actually trying to do is to get you a heightened sense of awareness. So the reason we slow breathing down...
in touch with your body inside, or...
It's to get in touch with the thing that is aware inside you.
Right.
So what is your awareness? And the first thing to do, which is why all these techniques across the world, including yoga and all these, what they've done is they've started with the physical.
So it's a stage. So it's a bit like going from to this notion of ajapa jap.
Absolutely. Yeah. How do the very word ajapa jap implies that it's the end. It's not the first stage. So in the same way, any technique that you use, then what you do is you superimpose Naam on top of that technique, and I think this is what is so powerful about Naam.
Jasvinder, I mean, you know, we try to ask difficult questions, not because, you know, but because we're trying to answer the doubts in people's minds. And some people say...
Yeah, he's a man for a difficult question.
Well, I mean, some people say, you know, for these people who sit down and do Waheguru, 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 it's a kind of like a Totaratan, it's a kind of just like a mechanical parrot fashion, and has no... I mean, is that Naam Simran? Waheguru, Waheguru, Waheguru?
So there's many forms of Naam Simran. I personally believe that is a legitimate form of Naam Simran. I know there were various...
By the way, I'm not saying it's not legitimate, okay? I'm just trying to...
I tried to help you out there,
I don't want... There's a plenty crowd out there that want to go for me, but go on.
So it is a legitimate form of Naam Simran. I'm very aware that there are various people who interpret parts of the Gurbani and say, no, Naam Simran should be done vocally, it should be done internally, it should be... various opinions. I haven't got a position on those. My personal belief is you try what works for you. You know, it's there. If you sit there and basically spend too much time trying to analyse what's going on before you actually ever dip your toe in the water, you're just never going to get anywhere.
Again, I mean, wasting time.
I always use exercise as an analogy to meditation. It's like, you know, the people who stand outside the gym and talk about the exercises and don't actually go in until they've got all their equipment, until they've got their protein cup, and they're not going to actually go in and do the exercise.
Let me follow that analogy, because you could also say that if you don't exercise properly, you could perform certain exercise and it could be damaging.
Well, I'll take that analogy, and if we look at something like, if you were exercising to lose weight, you could just ask somebody, how do you lose weight? And 10 different people will give you 10 different answers. And in that same way, there's lots of people that have different ways that Naam Simran works for them.
I think we've got a call, so let's see our first caller. Waheguru ji ka khalsa, Waheguru ji ki fateh. Hello.
हेलो सत श्री अकाल जी।
हाँ जी, सत श्री अकाल जी। अपना नाम दसो जी, कित्थों करदे कॉल जी?
मेरा भाजी राणा नाम है मेरा।
राणा जी, अच्छा जी, अज दे शो दे बारे तुसीं की कहना चाहोगे?
बस शो भाजी थोड़े ना सोना ना।
धन्यवाद जी।
ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵਧੀਆ ਬਤਾਵੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਬਹੁਤ ਵਧੀਆ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੋ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ ਦਾ ਥੋੜੀ ਘੱਟ ਸਮਝ ਲੱਗਦੀ ਹੈ
ਮੈਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ
ਜਿਹੜੇ
ਤੁਸੀਂ
ਮੁੰਡੇ ਤਾਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਰੂਹ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਏ ਹੋ ਆ
ਜੀ ਜੀ
ਇਹ ਮੁੰਡੇ ਦੀ ਸੂਰਤ ਦੇਖ ਕੇ ਨਾ ਸੋਹਣਾ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਭਾਜੀ
ਹਾਂਜੀ ਬਹੁਤ
ਸਾਡੀ
ਸੋਹਣੇ
ਕੰਟਰੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹ ਸੂਰਤ ਹੈ ਨਹੀਂ
ਜੀ ਜੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਿਹੜੀ ਕੰਟਰੀ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ
ਮੈਂ ਤਾਂ ਭਾਜੀ ਇੱਥੇ ਇੰਗਲੈਂਡ 'ਚ ਰਹਿੰਦਾ ਹਾਂ
ਅੱਛਾ
ਤੇ ਪਰ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੇਖ ਕੇ ਨਾ ਭਾਜੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਮੁੰਡੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਆਏ ਨਾ ਦੋ ਜੱਗ ਮੈਂ ਨਾ
ਹਾਂਜੀ
ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਭਾਜੀ ਮੁੰਡਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਬਾਤਾਂ ਸੁਣੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ
ਜੀ
ਸਾਨੂੰ ਅੰਗਰੇਜ਼ੀ ਫਿਰ ਘੱਟ ਸਮਝ ਲੱਗਦੀ ਪਰ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਬਾਤਾਂ ਦੇਖ ਕੇ ਨਾ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਸੋਹਣਾ
ਧੰਨਵਾਦ ਜੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਖੁਸ਼ ਕਰਤਾ ਅੱਜ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਹਾਂਜੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ ਜੀ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ
ਸਤਿ ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ ਜੀ
You got a fan club there. He said he doesn't understand the word he's saying, but he loves it anyway.
I've let the side down without the fun, haven't I? It's just,
The power of the Sikhis.
I was hoping they could CGI that in over.
So we were saying that, in a sense, you know, you have to dip your feet into the water if you want to learn to swim. You can't just stand by the banks and learn to swim. And in some senses, you know, you have to kind of step forward, don't you?
ਜਦੋਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸਾਸ ਗ੍ਰਾਸ ਨਾਮ ਜਪਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ and that's fine with me but you can do it quietly you can do it ਬਹੁਤ ਚੁੱਪ ਚਾਪ ਨਾ
It's not a performance, is
and
it?
you don't have to raise your voice
Simran is not a performance. It shouldn't be a performance. You shouldn't be saying, "Hey, look at me, I'm doing so much Simran."
I think if we go back to the analogy, which is that everyone meditates in different ways, one of the key things I think that we don't do within this, which is that if we take the analogy of how do you lose weight, somebody has to be checking, is it actually working? So it doesn't matter whether you're doing it out loud or quietly, is that do you have the mechanism that says, is it working?
Okay, we'll come back to
a phone call.
We'll come back to how would we know if it's working, but let's take the next call. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Hello ਜੀ
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ
ਜੀ ਭੈਣ ਜੀ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਨਾਂ ਦੱਸੋਗੇ ਤਾਂ ਕਿੱਥੋਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਕਾਲ ਜੀ
ਕਸ਼ਮੀਰ ਕੋ
ਹਾਂ ਜੀ ਭੈਣ ਜੀ ਕਿਹੜੀ ਜਗ੍ਹਾ ਤੋਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ
ਹੰਸਲਾ
ਹਾਂ ਓਕੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਲੱਗ ਗਈ ਆ ਫਿਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ
ਹਾਂਜੀ
ਸੋ ਵਾਟ ਵੁੱਡ ਯੂ ਲਾਈਕ ਟੂ ਸੇ ਅੱਜ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਅੱਜ ਕੀ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਚਾਹੋਗੇ
I want to say that depending on what spirit level you are you can feel pain or you can't feel pain so it just depends on what state your mind is in you can actually physically see the damage but you don't actually feel it
are you speaking from experience are you speaking from personal experience or are you making a general observation
so ਜੇ ਤਤੀ ਤਵੀ ਤੇ ਬੈਠੇ ਆ
ਜੀ
ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਦਿਸ ਰਹੀ ਆ ਕਿ ਬੋਡੀ ਤੇ ਡੈਮੇਜ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ but ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ in that signal it bypasses your brain you don't actually feel it
okay that's fantastic that's really fascinating and do you want to respond
and it's like if you are calm you've been meditating for a long time people can swear at you and it won't hurt you at all. Whereas if you haven't been meditating, you got up one morning wrong side of the bed and somebody said something to you very simple, you just blow your head off.
I think that's fantastic, really. Thanks very much for those thoughts. I mean, Benji's, it's almost like gives you those powers to resist.
ਕਿੰਨੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਰਸਕ ਗੁਰੂ ਗਾਵੇ ਤੇ ਨਾਲੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਕਨੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਜੋ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ you don't know what's going around you what's happening around you
fear this thing about fear as well ਥੋੜਾ ਡਰ ਵੀ ਚਲ ਜਾਂਦਾ
absolutely ਨਿਰਭਉ ਜਪੇ ਸਗਲ ਭਉ ਮਿਟੇ
to be provocative because I like being provocative and contrarian I think it's worth asking yourself the question, like Satpal said, we're never going to know whether Guru Arjan Dev Ji actually felt pain or not because we can't be part of his subjective experience. But if he didn't feel any pain, does that actually belittle his achievement to you, or does it actually greaten it? For me personally, my understanding of the way Guru Granth Sahib talks about the difference between pain and the physical suffering, or the physical resistance, emotional resistance. He felt the pain, and that was the achievement. That was the fact that such extreme pain can be endured by someone who's effectively an Olympic athlete of meditation. So because otherwise you could argue, well, anyone who's had their nerves severed is effectively in the same state as Guru Arjan Dev Ji. They're just now devoid of pain. We should all go get surgery and get that nerve chopped. Basically, that gives us pain. I think he perceives it. But his response to it is completely different from the average person because of the tools that he's used to get to where he is. I think for me personally anyway, that's a far greater achievement than to say, it's okay, we don't have to compare ourselves to Guru Arjan Dev Ji, he never felt any pain.
Satpal, we've got another call. I think we're pretty popular, so let's take the call. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Hello ji.
हेलो जी।
हाँ जी भाई साहब जी, स्वागत ਤੁਹਾਡਾ। ਨਾਮ ਦੱਸੋ ਜੀ, ਕਿੱਥੋਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਕਾਲ ਜੀ?
हाँ जी।
ਹਾਂਜੀ ਦੱਸੋ ਜੀ।
ਤੁਸੀਂ ਲਾਈਵ ਆ ਭਾਜੀ, ਨਾਮ ਦੱਸੋ ਆਪਣਾ, ਕਾਲ ਕਿੱਥੋਂ ਕਰ?
मैं जसवीर सिंह वुलवरहैम्पटन ਤੋਂ ਬੋਲ ਰਿਹਾ ਜੀ।
ਜੀ ਜਸਵੀਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ, ਸਵਾਗਤ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਅੱਜ ਦੇ ਟੌਪਿਕ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਕੀ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਚਾਹੋਗੇ?
ਦੇਖੋ ਟੌਪਿਕ ਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਇਹ ਹੈ, ਹੁਣ ਇਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਾਡੀ ਸਿਚੁਏਸ਼ਨ ਸੀ ਨਾ, ਜਿੰਨੇ ਵੀ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੈਂਟਰ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਸਾਰੇ ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ ਬੋਲੀ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ।
ਜੀ ਜੀ ਜੀ
ਬੋਲਦੇ ਆ ਨਾ, ਸਾਰੀ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਸੁਣ ਰਹੀ ਆ
ਜੀ।
ਹੁਣ ਇਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਕਿ ਸਰੋਤੇ ਏਦਾਂ ਵੀ ਹੈਗੇ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ ਸਮਝ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਉਂਦੀ।
ਠੀਕ ਠੀਕ
ਜੀ ਜੀ।
ਹੁਣ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਰੋਤੇ ਬੈਠੇ ਨਾ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ 'ਚ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਪਏ ਆ ਨਾ,
ਜੀ।
ਸੁਣਦੇ ਪਏ ਆ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪੁੱਛੋ ਊੜਾ ਐੜਾ ਸੱਸਾ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਕੱਕਾ ਕੱਕਾ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਹੁੰਦਾ।
ਜੀ ਜੀ ਜੀ।
ਦੇਖੋ ਇਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਿਚੁਏਸ਼ਨ, ਅਸੀਂ ਹੁਣ ਕਦੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ 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 ਬੋਲਦੇ ਆ ਨਾ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪੁੱਛੋ ਹੁਣ ਹਰ ਵੇਲੇ ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ ਬੋਲਦੇ ਆ, ਠੀਕ ਹੈ।
ਜੀ ਜੀ।
ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ ਨਾਲ ਪਿਆਰ ਹੈਗਾ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਸਰੂਪ ਪਾਇਆ ਹੈਗਾ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਬੜਾ ਇੱਕ ਦੂਜੇ ਨਾਲ ਪਿਆਰ ਹੈਗਾ, ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ ਨਾਲ ਪਿਆਰ ਹੈਗਾ, ਕੀਰਤਨ ਵੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੋਣਗੇ। ਗੁਰਨਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ, ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਚੰਗਾ ਜਾਣਦਾ, ਪਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਾਣਦੇ। ਪਰ ਮੈਂ ਸਿੱਖ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪੁੱਛਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਹਾਂ ਵੀ ਇਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਦੁਨੀਆ 'ਚ ਲੋਕੀ ਸੁਣਦੇ ਪਏ ਆ, ਇਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਕਈ ਬਜ਼ੁਰਗ ਵੀ ਬੈਠੇ ਆ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਸੁਣਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ। ਹਾਂਜੀ, ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਸੁਣਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ। ਹਰ ਵੇਲੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ ਬੋਲਦੇ ਆ, ਇਹ ਵੀ ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ ਬੋਲਦੇ ਆ। ਅੱਛਾ, ਹਰ ਵੇਲੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ ਹੀ ਬੋਲਦੇ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ, ਸਾਡੀ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਕਿੱਥੇ ਆ? ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੱਸੋ ਮੈਨੂੰ।
ਜੀ ਜੀ।
ਦੇਖੋ ਇਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਇਹ ਦੇਖੋ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਦੀ ਨਾ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਆ ਨਾ, ਇਹ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੁਰਸਿੱਖੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਬਣਾਉਣੀ ਆ। ਸਰਦਾਰ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਸੋਹਣਾ ਬਾਣਾ ਪਾਇਆ।
ਨਹੀਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਵਾਲ ਪਾਇਆ, ਉਹਦਾ ਜਵਾਬ ਲੈਣਾ ਤਾਂ
ਊੜਾ ਦੱਸੋ, ਇਹਨੂੰ ਦੋਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪੁੱਛੋ।
ਚਲੋ ਜੀ, ਆਪਾਂ ਪੁੱਛਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਭਾਜੀ।
ਇਹਨੂੰ ਊੜਾ ਸੁਣਾਓ।
ਠੀਕ ਹੈ, ਆਪਾਂ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ।
ਕੋਈ ਬੰਦਾ ਕਰ ਸਕਦਾ।
ਧੰਨਵਾਦ ਜੀ। ਆਪਾਂ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਸਾਡਾ ਅੱਜ ਟੌਪਿਕ ਤਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਲੈਂਗੁਏਜ ਦਾ,
ਪਰ ਇਹ ਤਾਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਅੱਛੀ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਬੋਲਦੇ ਆ।
ਚਲੋ ਉਹ ਵੱਖਰੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ, ਪਰ ਮੈਂ ਜਵਾਬ ਦਊਂਗਾ ਇਹਦਾ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਕੋਈ ਐਸੀ ਗੱਲ
ਸਾਨੂੰ ਦੇ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਨਾ।
ਹਾਂ ਚਲੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜਵਾਬ।
ਹੁਣ ਭਾਜੀ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਬਹੁਤ ਠੀਕ ਆ ਕਿ ਹੁਣ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਦਾ ਹੁਣ ਬਹੁਤ ਘੱਟ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਹੈਗਾ, ਪਰ ਸਾਡਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਇਹ ਆ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੌਜਵਾਨ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਲਈ ਵੀ ਕੋਈ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ
ਤਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਗੋਰੇ ਦੇਖਦੇ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਦੂਜੇ ਧਰਮਾਂ ਦੇ ਲੋਕ ਦੇਖਦੇ,
ਆਪਾਂ ਗਾਂ ਜੋ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਵਧਾਉਣੀ ਆ, ਆਪਾਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਇੰਟਰੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਕਰਨੀ ਪੈਣੀ ਆ ਨਾ, ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਅੰਗਰੇਜ਼ੀ ਸਮਝ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਆ। ਹੁਣ ਅਸੀਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਬੋਲਣ ਲੱਗ ਜਾਈਏ, ਗੂੜੀ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਬੋਲਣ ਲੱਗ ਜਾਈਏ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਚੈਨਲ ਆਫ ਕਰ ਦੇਣਾ। ਹੁਣ ਚਲੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਬਜ਼ੁਰਗ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਸਾਰੇ ਬੈਠੇ ਆ, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਮਝੀ ਪਹਿਲੋਂ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ, ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਚਲੋ ਦੇਖ ਲੋਗੇ ਤੇ ਕਹਿ ਦੋਗੇ ਹਾਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਸੋਹਣੇ ਮੁੰਡੇ ਆਏ ਆ, ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਬੋਲਦੇ ਆ। ਪਰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਲਾਉਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ, ਦਿਲਚਸਪ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵਧਾਉਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਨਾਲ ਲੱਗੋ। ਜਿਹੜੇ ਯੰਗਸਟਰ ਆ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਨਾਲ ਲੱਗੋ। ਇਹ ਕੋਈ
ਸਤਪਾਲ ਜੀ, ਓਕੇ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਜੇ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਨਾ ਬੋਲੀਏ ਤਾਂ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਪ੍ਰਚਾਰ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਕਰੋਗੇ, ਪਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪ੍ਰਚਾਰ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ, ਕੀ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਕੋਈ ਦਿੱਕਤ ਪੈਂਦੀ ਹੈ?
ਮੇਰਾ ਪ੍ਰਚਾਰ ਤਾਂ ਮੇਨਲੀ ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੁੰਦਾ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਮੇਰਾ ਮਕਸਦ ਇਹ ਆ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਾਡਾ ਹੁਣ ਭਾਈ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜਿਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਫੋਨ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀ, ਉਹ ਇੰਗਲੈਂਡ ਵਿੱਚ ਬੈਠੇ ਆ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਗ੍ਰੈਂਡ ਚਿਲਡਰਨ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ, ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ ਦਾ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਹੈਗਾ, ਇਹ ਦਿਸ ਇਜ਼ ਨਾਟ ਗੋਇੰਗ ਐਨੀਵੇਅਰ। ਮੈਂ ਸਟੇਜ ਤੇ ਵੀ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਕਿ soon we're going to have grandparents born and brought up in this country who can't think in Punjabi. So the prachar, I think, in English needs to increase, not decrease, because English is increasing as a language. I think
so, and I think it's neither or. I mean, this is either or है नहीं, अपन we need prachar in every language. But एक मैं कहूँगा मंजीत गल है, जे मैं कई बार सोचता मैं जेडे पंजाब च बहुत सिक्खी घट रही है, ਪਰ ਉੱਥੇ ਤਾਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਸਾਰੇ ਬੋਲਦੇ ਆ। ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਿਰਫ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਵੀ ਜੇ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਹੀ ਗਾਰੰਟੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ, ਪਰ ਨਹੀਂ, ਆਪਾਂ ਵੀ ਹੈਵ ਟੂ ਗੋ ਬਿਯੋਂਡ ਦਾ।
ਇਹੀ ਤਾਂ ਗੱਲ ਆ, ਇਹ ਸੱਭਿਆਚਾਰ ਤੇ ਧਰਮ ਇਹ ਦੋ ਵੱਖਰੀਆਂ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ, ਤੇ ਦੋਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਹੁਣ ਧਿਆਨ ਦੇਣਾ ਪੈਣਾ। ਪਰ ਕੋਈ ਵਸਿਆਂ ਤੇ ਕੋਈ ਟਾਈਮਾਂ ਤੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸੋਚਣਾ ਪੈਣਾ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਤੇ ਕੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਬੋਲੀ ਠੀਕ ਲੱਗੂ, ਤਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਅੰਗਰੇਜ਼ੀ ਵਿੱਚ
ਚਲੋ ਆਪਣਾ ਵਿਸ਼ਾ ਅੱਜ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀਗਾ, ਪਰ ਮੇਰਾ ਖਿਆਲ ਭਾਈ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦਾ
ਬਹੁਤ ਚੰਗਾ
ਕੀਤਾ, ਔਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਮੇਰਾ ਖਿਆਲ ਜਵਾਬ ਮਿਲ ਗਿਆ ਵੀ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਥੋੜੀ ਬਹੁਤੀ ਆਉਂਦੀ, ਉੜਾ ਵੀ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਆਉਂਦਾ, ਔਰ ਗੁਰੂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਵੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਪੜ੍ਹ ਸਕਦੇ, ਐਸੀ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗੀ, ਔਰ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਕੰਟਰੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੰਮ ਕੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਆ। ਸੋ ਸਤਪਾਲ ਜੀ, ਇੱਕ ਹੋਰ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਬਾਣੀ ਦੀ ਤੁਕ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਕਈ ਵਾਰੀ ਜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੇ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਸ਼ਾਂਤੀ ਬਾਹਰੋਂ ਕਿਤੋਂ ਲੱਭ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਔਰ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਬਾਹਰ ਢੂੰਡਤ ਬਹੁਤ ਦੁੱਖ ਪਾਵੇ, ਘਰੇ ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤ ਘਟ ਮਾਹੀ ਜੀਓ। So Amrit and Naam often are kind of synonymous, yeah. So we're back to this. What is this nectar, this sweetness that, you know, because we think about eating mithai or something. You know, what is it? I mean, you know, is it painlessness? What is it?
I think first and foremost, I think first and foremost we have to clarify that this Amrit experience is achievable. And unfortunately most of us don't talk about Amrit in that sense, this kind of ability to be able to taste this.
Let's just finish your point and then we'll take the call.
Yeah, so I think we need to almost, we can go into what the experience is, but I think that's going to be subjective.
Okay, we'll come on. Okay, let's take another call. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Hello जी
जी का खालसा वाहिगुरु जी की फतेह जी
जी भाई साहब स्वागत ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਨਾਮ ਦੱਸੋ ਤਾਂ ਕਿੱਥੋਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਕਾਲ ਜੀ
मैं सुखविंदर सिंह बोल रहा जी ਅਸੀਂ ਐਡਿਨਬਰਾ ਤੋਂ ਬੋਲ ਰਹੇ
ਜੀ ਸੁਖਵਿੰਦਰ ਜੀ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਅੱਜ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਬਾਰੇ ਕੀ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਚਾਹੋਗੇ
ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਭਾਜੀ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਅਸੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇੰਨਾ ਵਧੀਆ ਟੌਪਿਕ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਏ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ
ਧੰਨਵਾਦ
ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਸਾਰੇ ਚਾਰੋਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਬੈਠੇ ਆ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦਾ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਅਸੀਂ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ
ਧੰਨਵਾਦ ਜੀ
ਬਹੁਤ ਤੇ ਅੱਜ ਬਹੁਤ ਅੱਛਾ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਮੋਸਟ ਆਫ ਦਾ ਟਾਈਮ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਟੌਪਿਕ ਆ ਉਹੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਪੁਰਾਣੀਆਂ ਸਾਖੀਆਂ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੀਆਂ ਸੁਣਾ ਕੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਨਾ ਉਹੀ ਕਰੀ ਜਾ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਲੇਕਿਨ ਅੱਜ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਏ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਪ੍ਰੈਕਟੀਕਲ ਲਾਈਫ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਡਾ ਟੌਪਿਕ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਏ ਹੈਗੇ
ਜੀ
ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨਾਲ ਰਿਲੇਟਡ ਹੈ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਨਾ ਨਾਨਕ ਦੁਖੀਆ ਸਭ ਸੰਸਾਰ ਨਾ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਛੂਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ ਕੋਈ ਸਿੱਖ ਹੈ ਹਿੰਦੂ ਮੁਸਲਮਾਨ ਈਸਾਈ ਕ੍ਰਿਸਚਨ ਬਲੀਵਰ ਨਾਨ ਬਲੀਵਰ ਸਾਰੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆ ਗਏ ਆ
ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਭਾਜੀ ਔਰ ਇਹ ਜਦ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਬੋਲਿਆ ਨਾ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਨਾਨਕ ਨਾਮ ਜਹਾਜ਼ ਫਿਲਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਆਇਆ ਸੀ ਤਾਂ ਕੋਈ ਅਸੀਂ
ਨਾਨਕ ਦੁਖੀਆ ਸਭ ਸੰਸਾਰ
ਪਰ ਇਹ ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ
ਦੂਸਰੀ ਲਾਈਨ ਵਿੱਚ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਇਹਦਾ ਆਨਸਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਸੀ ਸੋ ਸੁਖੀਆ ਜੋ ਨਾਮ
ਆਧਾਰ ਬਸ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਉੱਥੇ ਗੱਲ ਆ ਗਈ ਹਾਂਜੀ
ਲੇਕਿਨ ਹੁਣ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਹ ਦੇਖਣਾ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਨਾਮ ਕਿਹੜਾ ਆ ਕਿੱਥੇ ਆ ਨਾਮ ਹੈ ਨਾ
ਜੀ
ਜਿਹੜਾ ਨਾਮ ਆ ਅਸੀਂ ਸੋਚਦੇ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਕਰ ਲਿਆ ਇਹੀ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਨਾਮ ਹੈਗਾ ਫਿਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਸੋਚਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਨਾਮ ਆ ਇਹ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਕਿਤੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਬਾਹਰੋਂ ਮਿਲਣਾ ਹੈ ਬਾਹਰੋਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਿਤੋਂ ਮਿਲਣਾ ਇਹ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਮ ਅੰਦਰ ਆ
ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਜੀ
ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਇਹੀ ਆਪਾਂ
ਇੱਕ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪ ਤੇ ਭੁਲੇਖਾ ਪਾ ਕੇ ਬੈਠੇ ਵੀ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਨਾਮ ਦਾ ਕਨਸੈਪਟ ਕੱਢਿਆ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਇਹ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਕਿਤੇ ਕਨਸੈਪਟ ਹੈ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਹਨਾ ਇਹ ਨਾਮ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਜਦੋਂ ਤੋਂ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਬਣੀ ਆ ਉਹ ਨਾਮ ਉਹ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਸਾਡਾ ਗੁਰੂ ਆ ਇਸੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਸੀ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਗੁਰੂ ਸੁਰਤ ਤੋਂ ਚੇਲਾ
ਜੀ ਭਾਜੀ
ਹੁਣ ਇਹ ਆ ਕਿ ਗੁਰੂ
ਲਾਸਟ ਪੁਆਇੰਟ ਕਰ ਲਓ ਲਾਸਟ ਪੁਆਇੰਟ ਕਰਕੇ ਸਾਡੀ ਕਾਜ਼ ਕਾਫੀ ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ ਜੀ
ਹਾਂ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਜੇ ਲੱਖ ਇਸਤਰੀਆਂ ਭੋਗ ਕਰੇ ਨਵਖੰਡ ਰਾਜ ਕਮਾਵੇ ਬਿਨ ਸਤਗੁਰ ਸੁਖ ਨਾ ਪਾਵੇ ਫਿਰ ਜੋਨੀ ਆਵੇ ਸੋ ਇਹਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਆਨਸਰ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹ ਇਹੀ ਹੈ ਜਿੰਨਾ ਚਿਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਅੰਦਰ ਨਾਮ ਨਾਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਜੁੜਦੇ ਹਨਾ
ਜੀ
ਉਹਨਾਂ ਚਿਰ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸੁੱਖ ਬਾਹਰੋਂ ਕਿਤੋਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਮਿਲ ਸਕਦਾ ਨਾ ਧੀਆਂ ਪੁੱਤਾਂ ਚੋਂ ਨਾ ਪੈਸੇ ਚੋਂ ਨਾ ਕਿਸੇ ਚੀਜ਼ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਨਹੀਂ
ਬਹੁਤ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ ਜੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਵਧੀਆ ਵਿਚਾਰ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ
ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਓ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਤੇ
ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਕਰੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਆਇਓ ਸਾਡੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਇੱਕ ਨਾ ਭਾਜੀ ਨੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਵਧੀਆ ਪੁਆਇੰਟ ਰੱਖਿਆ ਖੁਸ਼ੀ ਜਸਵਿੰਦਰ ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਵੀ ਨਾਮ ਤਾਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਵੀ ਸੀ it didn't just appear with Guru Nanak although it does say ਭਾਈ ਗੁਰਦਾਸ ਜੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਕੱਲ ਧਾਰਨ ਗੁਰੂ ਨਾਨਕ ਆਇਆ ਸਤ ਨਾਮ ਪੜਮੰਤ ਸੁਨਾਇਆ so in a sense it was purged with Guru Nanak although it is a universal thing
absolutely it's a concept that's been around for millennia before Sikhi. I think what Sikhi does quite effectively though is it gives us a sense of how broad this actual concept is, because in the Eastern traditions, especially in Hinduism, it's used very much as a mantra, and although that's a great starting point and Sikhi advocates it as a starting point, I think anyone who reads Gurbani and even translations of Gurbani, it becomes very quickly obvious to you that Naam is something much more expansive.
Satpal, I mean on that, because if you take Gurbani, some of that predates Guru Nanak Dev Ji for hundreds of years, from Ramanand, Farid Ji and Kabir Ji, and they also talk about Naam as well. And Guru Nanak, obviously, you know, some people say that the whole philosophy of Nanak is a philosophy of Naam. So what is it that Guru Nanak does? What's the intervention that Guru Nanak is making? Is it that he's explaining it to us, or what's happening here?
I think Guru Nanak and the Gurus have made clear that Naam has existed in the Vedas and historically, but it's very clear that over time some of the rituals have overtaken the essence of it. So Guru Nanak Dev Ji, I don't think is claiming a monopoly on Naam. He's simply saying that to the people of the world, you've forgotten that this is
shining the light back on the earth to remind of the true path. Yes. Hanji agle kawani Vaheguru ji ka khalsa Vaheguru ji ki fateh. Hello ji
Vaheguru ji ka khalsa Vaheguru ji ki fateh
ਜੀ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਭਾਈ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨਾਂ ਦੱਸੋ ਜੀ ਕਿੱਥੋਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਕਾਲ
ਮੈਂ ਨਾਮ ਰਵਿੰਦਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਮੈਂ ਹੰਸਰੋਂ ਤੋਂ ਬੋਲ ਰਿਹਾ ਜੀ
ਰਵਿੰਦਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੀ ਆ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਲੱਗ ਗਏ ਹਾਂ ਹਾਂਜੀ ਕੀ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਚਾਹੋਗੇ
ਮੈਂ ਲੱਗੇ ਨਾ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਕੰਗ੍ਰੈਚੁਲੇਸ਼ਨਸ for producing this extremely high quality program.
Thank you.
The discussion by these two young men is absolutely beautiful and top class. This is the way the young nowadays think. The old-fashioned way of thinking, there have been some various comments that it should not be in English. Those do not exist anymore, and the young do not understand them, and they're not bothered to listen to them.
Yeah.
The extremely high level of thinking of the gurus has been so well put across by these young men. And I'm proud to say that at last Sikhism is looking towards the young and the youth to bring Sikhi forward.
Definitely.
Thank you.
I have grown up in this country. I'm over 60 years old. I remember my childhood where my elders used to come to the Gurdwara, speak in Punjabi only, and never teach Sikhi. This is the way to teach Sikhi to the young.
Definitely.
Thank you, Pradeep.
Thank
The
you.
change I have seen in those 60, 65 years is absolutely amazing. You get these young kids coming across to the Gurdwaras now. In the old days, they did not.
Paji, thanks very much for your vote of confidence, and please keep watching Akaal Channel. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa. So, I mean,
it's really high quality, I believe that.
Well, but there is a tension. Let's be honest. There's a tension between tradition and the progressive kind of thought that Gurnam. And so we have to kind of balance the two, don't we? It's not either or. We go with both. We can never forget Punjabi. We can never forget Gurumukhi. But we also need to realise that the Gurus spoke in the languages that people understood wherever they went.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I think there's a distinction between doing prachar in various languages as opposed to saying that Sikhi is now moving on to English. Guru Granth Sahib Ji will never move on to another language because the Guru and the Bani is fixed into that.
Which is very unique in terms of our Dharam. You could say that we have never ever allowed the Guru Granth Sahib to be translated, whereas if you look at other religions, you have the Bibles in English and things. So that is one of the really essence of our Sikhi, is the nad, the sound, the kind of technology behind it.
There is something that's ingrained in the words that the Gurus have written, which means that alone is sacred, and that can't be, it can be translated, but then it doesn't mean that it never be changed. The original is essentially the.
We've got another call. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Hello Ji.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
जी भाई साहब स्वागत जी नाम दसो जी कित्थों करते कॉल जी
मैं लवप्रीत सिंह बोल रहा हूं हॉस्पिटल
जी लवप्रीत सिंह जी की कहना चाहूंगे
I would like to appeal to the youngsters
जी
through obviously by Satpal Singh ji that please I appeal benti to the youngsters to obviously start listening to Satpal Singh and get connected to the Sikhi. So if you get connected to the Sikhi and get educated, I think half of your problems will get solved. Because what's happening is our youngsters, they're just, they're getting the image from the outer Sikhi, but they haven't got no knowledge about the Sikhi. And when you haven't got any knowledge, it's like they got this delusion question mark on their head that what is Sikhi about. So I think this is the best way what Satpal Singh is doing. It's an amazing job.
Okay.
So get connected to the Nanak Naam and get yourself educated.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Every youngster should be a walking university, basically.
Yeah, I like that concept, and of course, Dharamsal, we are the embodiment of the Dharamsal. I mean, that's Guru Nanak. Kariyan the Dharamsal. Guru Nanak said, and instance, you could say that what he meant there was that within everybody, within everybody there is a Dharamsal. As well as within everybody's house, there should be a Dharamsal.
Can I just comment on that? Because I think I just want to second what the last caller has just said in terms of the work that Satpal Singh is doing. I think there's a shortage of people who are actually taking what's ingrained in Sikhi and the intellectual ideas and actually making them practical and accessible for people. I think the work he's doing is fantastic, and I think we need to spend more time and support in sort of encouraging him to do that, because it's just it's really popular for people.
I think we need to allow 1,000 flowers to bloom, and that's the key thing, isn't it? I mean, we've been saying for many years we need Western educated good Sikhs who take Sikhi seriously. And now that they've emerged, the committees need to start to support them rather than importing grantees from India all the time. I mean, you're opening up paths now for others to follow. I mean, we've got Basic Sikhi, Bhai Jagraj Singh and others as well.
I think firstly it's really important to acknowledge that we don't do anything on our own. The Guru gives us all the strength to do everything. But I think we are beginning to see Gurdwara committees now start accepting that this is a very valid way, because they're the ones coming up to us and say that they're the ones coming up to us and say the youngsters aren't coming to the Gurdwara, so they know that what's been tried before isn't necessarily working now, and this is where we're able to, with whatever little knowledge we have, is to actually share it to the new generation and actually make it relevant for people where maybe that hasn't been possible before.
I mean, we've just got about 2 minutes left, Jasvinder. I mean, we're going to have to do follow-ups, and we will do, because there's so much to kind of cover. We've only scratched the surface. But any kind of final summing up thoughts from you, from what we've talked about today?
You know, people face some very real problems in the world today. I think all Satpal and I want people to realise is there are tools on offer in our very own tradition that are really effective and practical with dealing with things like anxiety and depression, and we don't need to go external, outside for those. All the knowledge is there, and now we've got people like Satpal who are dedicating their time to actually teach this to people. So, make use of that.
Yeah, Satpal Singh, last minute.
I would sort of say the same sentiments, which is the fact that Gurbani does have the solution. Unfortunately, people have looked at Gurbani and sort of associated with just everything that they see from an external, and actually Guru spends more time saying that I can help you with your problems of your mind and your depression and all these kind of things, and hopefully over time more of that knowledge is going to start coming out, that people can go back to the Guru and find the solutions to suffering.
Manjit, any thoughts?
I mean, I've got so much respect for Jasvinder and Satpal, the high-level quality seva they're doing out there for the youth and the youngsters. I'm so proud of them. I'll tell you, I've kept quiet and I wanted to just listen and listen to them, that they got so much to give out there.
I just like poetry.
And actually,
you're amazing as well.
We could maybe take one. We've got maybe about a minute. Is it a longer?
I can do.
Could you do a quick one?
I can do a minute if I can pull it up.
If you put it in with.
Okay, so this is effectively a poem about meditation itself.
So we did say that Jasvinder is a poet.
He is a poet.
So this one's called Meditate. Closed eyes, breathe softly sweet. Calm, still mind, senses poised and pointed keep. With subtle noticing, luminous is that internal darkness sea. In oneself, bathe and swim the ocean of the presence deep. Call off the search in order to find what you ardently seek. Wondrous and unfathomable pure sentience. In that silent place, rest be. Meditate.
And so that's it. So Maharaja Bani ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਹਉ ਮੈਂ ਧੀਰਗ ਰੋਗ ਹੈ दारू पी समाए किरपा करे जे अपने जे गुर का शब्द कमाए शब्द ते गल आउंदी आ आपां जरूर शब्द ते विचार करो इत्थे आपां समाप्ति करदे आ भुल चुक माफ करनी जी वाहिगुरू जी का खालसा वाहिगुरू जी की फतेह।